In many ways, what I'm going to talk about is a little bit different from what you heard from most of the folks. Just a little bit of sort of where I come from is I belong to the Tata Group, which is about a $100 billion organization. So in some ways, full disclosures, it's a $100 billion organization based out of India. Most of its revenues come from outside India now. So about 60-65% of the revenues of the group are from outside India. And some of the marquee brands that you might be aware of, such as Jaguar Land Rover or Tetley Tea or Cora Steel, are all companies that are owned and operated by Tata. The company that I belong to is Tata Consultancy Services, which is the software and services operations of the group. We're about $15 billion, and we operate about 40-45 countries outside of India, in addition to being operations in India as well. The group that I belong to within TCS is Media and Information Services Vertical. And this is the group that addresses the industries which produce content products, content experience, or entertainment experience. So I'm not sure if I'm the only person. I know there are some Thomson Reuters folks who were there in the morning, and if they're still around, the kinds of companies that they represent are one segment of the customers that we deal with in my group. The other types of folks that we deal with in this group are entertainment companies such as the film studios and broadcasting companies, advertising and new media companies, publishing organizations, and information services organizations. So fairly a broad spectrum of companies, but the central theme that kind of runs across all of them is that they are in the business of content. They produce content products. Now, this is also an industry which has been affected the most in some ways by the 5 or the 4 digital forces that we all talk about, the social, mobile, big data, cloud. What's happened in this industry is that the product of the industry, that is the content or the content experience, that itself has transformed into becoming digital from being analog. The way the products are produced have been transformed also by way of the digital processes. The way these products are distributed have been transformed into more digital distribution channels. And finally, the way these products are consumed is also transformed because most of us these days consume these products on digital devices, whether it is mobile or laptops or desktops or whatever it may be. So that's what is being used to consume these products. As a result, every single component of the value chain of the industry is getting transformed. And what you see is a sort of a representational picture there of the value chain. It will conceptually will apply to whether it's an entertainment industry or an information services industries. Some elements will be more dominant in one, others will be less dominant in the other. But by and large, every single element is getting affected by the digital transformation, as we call it. And if you look at the products turning to digital, there is blurring of boundaries that is happening in this industry, and we'll see some examples of that. And I think in the morning, one of the speakers talked about the industries changing from systems of record to systems of engagement, and which we see in this industry very much happening. So transactional engagements with the consumers are giving way to a sort of a lingering on subscription-based long-term engagement with consumers. Let's take some examples of where we see these changes happening in. So consumer behavior as a result of digital has changed so much that all of us are familiar with Netflix and what it has done to the industry. And we'll talk a little bit more about the statistics of Netflix. But Netflix, which started off as a sort of a CD, DVD rental distribution organization, over a period of time morphed itself into becoming digital content distribution organization, which over a period of time is now morphing itself to original producer of content. And a program like a House of Cards and Orange is Black is really their production in that sense. What are they doing? They have tremendous amount of analytics insight that they are able to gather by virtue of being in the digital distribution business to know what is liked by what demography of consumers, where, how much. And in that sense, they use that information for two purposes. One is to better source their content, have better licensing arrangements. And there are many instances where if you have full seasons of program, but they will not license the entire program. They'll only license certain episodes based on what they see is the likely consumption of that. And second is creating their own original content in a manner where they know that it is going to be liked. So House of Cards was the first one, extremely successful. Orange is the Black is the next one, again extremely successful. And they're getting much more into those kinds of things. So you see sort of a transgression of boundaries happening in there. You see companies moving from analog to digital there. There is also significantly lowered barriers to entry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Amazon self-publishing, but if you are from that industry, on the Kindle, about 100 titles that are there, the top 100 titles, about 20 plus titles are really from self-publishers, and these publishers make six-figure numbers every year. So it's actually transforming the industry considerably by allowing a whole bunch of people to create content and consume content. One fundamental shift that is happening is the shifting of the model from being B2B to B2C. So every one of these organizations in this industry is now targeting end consumers more and more directly. And we see that happening, if you've seen the last few months, the broadcasting companies, one by one, have gone there with their OTT offering, as it's called, or over-the-top offering, where a CBS or an HBO Go, they have all begun to directly reach out to the consumers because the consumers are cutting the cords with the cable companies. And as a result, these companies have to really reach out directly to them to be able to be in the business. And there are more such things that are happening in there. So let me move on. What it is doing to the industry is that the industry is going through fairly serious trying periods because the old type of publishing revenues, the old type of analog revenues for them have dropped or are dropping or are stagnating. And I think if you're tracking Wall Street, last week, the media industry was probably one of the biggest reasons for the fall of the Wall Street over there. Many companies who declared their results in the last week, they found that ESPN was the major cause for Disney, and so also for Fox. Their analog channels are not really growing. Viacom had the same situation. What's happening is that the analog consumption of content is either stagnating or reducing. The digital is growing. The digital, while it is growing very fast, it's not growing as many in numbers. And I think the paradigm that we often hear there is that in the analog world, what was the analog dollars, in the digital world, it's more like a digital dime. So you sort of have to earn your way, very hard way there. On the other hand, for companies such as Thomson Reuters, 92% of their revenue comes from digital today, either digital or software. Same is true for Wolters Kluwer. Majority of their both of these are companies in the information services industry. They provide information which consumers consume or B2B organizations consume. So these organizations, over a period of, let's say, a decade and a half, have transformed themselves completely from being print-based or analog organizations to becoming more or less digital organizations today. They are all still struggling for growth, generally speaking, because their internal organizational setup and the costs are still very much print-oriented, even though the products have transformed. So that's the kind of a transformation that is happening across the value chain. And I think one of the statistics that I kind of read about Netflix and some of the companies that associate themselves with OTT is that during the prime time, and almost 60% of the internet bandwidth in the US is consumed by this digital entertainment channel. So which is a vast amount of consumption that is happening in there, vast number of consumers which are essentially consuming that content through that as well. So media in general, or media and information services, is turning to digital at an accelerating pace. Now, one question that kind of came to my mind, therefore, is location really losing the importance in this world of digital? Because when you are producing the content digitally and consuming it digitally, how does it matter whether you are here or there? So I give it another thought, and then on a different dimension, if we look at how the interactions happen in the media world between the producers and consumers of content, there are sort of three groupings that you can broadly make there. A physical to physical interaction. I go and buy a book from a Barnes and Noble. There's a brick and mortar store there. I'm buying a paper book from that place. Both sides are physical there. A physical to digital interaction, which is an interaction where, let's say, I'm ordering the same paper book from Amazon. So I'm ordering it digitally. I'm ordering it on internet, but it's still a physical book that I'm ordering there. And a digital to digital interaction where it could be that I have a Netflix subscription or an HBO Go subscription, and I'm just consuming the content, or a Huffington Post that I'm reading anywhere I want to, or a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times. The dots on the right-hand side, in my view, represent the degree of location affinity or degree of location insights that are associated with these types of interactions there. So in a physical to physical, they are the most, and in the case of a purely digital, in some ways, location alone perhaps plays a little bit of a less role. Now, I know I'm making statements, some of these statements may be politically incorrect, and this is a season of politically incorrect statements, so I apologize in advance for that in case that's the case, but that's a point of view. Let me take a few examples of where location intelligence is actually getting used in the context of media and information services industry. But from a point of view of content and entertainment, one type of use for location is to provide much more targeted content, much more targeted content experience. So if you go to a Disney theme park today, you will see a lot of sensor-driven location that is being used to either better target the actual entertainment experience, reduce the queues, determine where folks can actually spend the most time or take them to a popular ride or things like that. Or if you take an example of a Huffington Post or a Mashable, some of these started as blog sites and now they've become essentially global newspaper organizations. They are able to target their content based on the location to maybe even take it to translate it into the respective language of the consumer, have more local news automatically appear. So if I'm reading a news in DC today, I might end up with more DC news there, and if I read the news in Los Angeles, I might have more LA news there. So in that sense, they're able to do the targeting of the content based on the location. Location is only one dimension. It will also factor in other behavioral aspects. So if I read more Wall Street, they probably will have my persona there. They probably have a behavior of mine captured in there, and then I can personalize the news content the way I want. But it's used for targeting purposes there. Second is monetization of location, and I think all of us are familiar with examples of that. Some of these were given in the morning as well. But on one dimension, you can think of Uber and you can think of Waze as media companies. I mean, they're operating as transport facilitator organizations, but they're also media companies. They're providing information to you. And therefore, that's another option. The third type is targeted advertising, that has been talked about a lot. And the fourth, in the measurement, because every sensor that is there typically has a location associated with it. So whether it is a Nielsen or a ComScore or an XCD, the measurements that you do, they have sensor information coming in, which can be then used to provide intelligence for location. Over a period of time, the journey of location intelligence that organizations have taken have spanned from just using that for the conventional, what we call as a business intelligence activities or reporting activities, which you see in the left-hand side as being described as descriptive location intelligence or descriptive business intelligence, which is moving more and more into prescriptive now. With the models being in place, with the data availability increasing continuously, and ability to therefore, one, gain more insight, predict, optimize, and then turn them into platforms over a period of time. So if you look from on one dimension, the ad exchanges and ad networks which operate, they are in some ways really optimized platforms which for a given scenario are making a best deal. They're almost like your financial exchanges. So there are platforms, you provide a scenario to them and they will produce the best deal for you. So that's how we see this evolution happening. Now, finally, I want to kind of summarize that even though we see the use of location, there is a bit of paradox there in the industry, as I see it. That location information has become increasingly easily available. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the issue was location information wasn't as easily available. That's not the case anymore. I mean, you have more location information than you can use in many ways. But from what I see in the industry, at least in the IT departments or enterprises that I work with, there is a low awareness of the potential of the use of location information. That awareness helping to create a better business case, and also in some ways it's not mainstream, it's still a somewhat specialty domain. So you don't find location specialists as often and as widespread as you find Java, for example. So I think that in some ways these may be a little bit of an impediments to the use of it, and I think the challenges have been covered by other speakers as well. They relate to the privacy challenges, they relate to sharing of the information, security related challenges. So this in some ways is where I see media and information services industry and location intelligence. Thank you very much.